welcome to Under the Bonnet. We're just going to talk through our series that we've just completed on mission. So we've been looking at mission not from our perspective, but from God's perspective.
What did we call it? Sorry, I should speak through here. What did we call it? What did we call the series? Because we didn't really, did we?
What did we call it?
Wasn't it What is Mission?
What is mission?
I thought it was Connected or Reconnected.
Oh yeah, it was Reconnected because it was about, the whole idea is relationships and the fact that they're broken. So the broken relationship between us and God, the broken relationship between us and each other, which was yours, and the broken relationship between us and the world, which was Patrick.
But actually you usually put it in a much more positive light, which rather than focusing on the brokenness of the relationship was actually, I guess, the strength of the relationship potential between God and humanity, between one another and between us and the world, rather than looking at it from a negative perspective, looking at it from a sort of a reconciliation perspective.
Yeah, because I wanted to think about, okay, we often start with the broken, but before we were broken, before it was a mess, that was when God created us and the world, and he created it for a perfect relationship. So in the beginning, everything was as it should be. And so broken is not how we're meant to be. We're supposed to be in relationship with God and with each other and with the world.
Nice.
So that was the overall picture of it. Yeah.
So you started us off.
Yeah, so I started us off with thinking about our relationship with God.
You were a bit nervous about
I'm
that.
probably more nervous about this, to be
You're more
honest.
nervous about what we're doing now? No way.
I mean, for the weeks leading up to the sermon, I was probably more nervous about that. But for this, I feel a bit more.
It was the
Where
first
do I
time
look?
You preached at night.
Yeah, I'd done small things, but so that was a bit scary. But this is more scary.
But thank you for doing that. Really
No,
great.
it was actually quite fun,
Good.
and everybody was smiling at me. I'm assuming they were behind their masks.
You don't know.
No, but I could
But
tell
their
by
eyes
that
were
their
open.
eyes were smiling, and that was nice. So yeah, I enjoyed it.
So you kicked us off. Tell us a bit
Yes.
about that.
So yeah, I wanted us to think not just from our perspective, what do we do, but what's God's perspective. So God's perspective on us as people, and God's perspective on the relationship that he wants to have with us. And yeah, the fact that it's God relentlessly pursuing us, and it's all of him, that he just keeps on pursuing us even when we keep turning away, that he will keep pursuing us and wanting a relationship with us. And yeah, so that really struck me as I was looking at Genesis and then later at the passage in 2 Corinthians, that God is the one who's taking the initiative, and it's him that wants that to happen.
I mean, would it be fair to say that sometimes we as Christians, as followers of Jesus, actually, when we talk about the good news, put ourselves in the centre rather than God in the centre? And actually what you are trying to do is to say that God is in the centre, so it is God's mission, it is God's idea, and he actually goes relentlessly looking to bring people back into that relationship. So rather than saying, I have come to God, it's actually God has come to. Is that fair?
I think so. And then also the fact that right in the beginning it says, let us make humans in our image. So, and then later on we understand that more fully as Trinity, that Jesus was there at the beginning, and there's always been this relational existence between God, the Father, Son and Holy Spirit, and then that is just overflowing into humanity. And so him creating us is just an outflowing of the love that's already existent between God, the Father, Son and Holy Spirit. So putting that in that perspective, it just reorientates us, I think, to the way things should be.
And you nailed the application. So your sermon was overflowing with application.
There were probably quite a lot of different applications, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted to think about the fact that mission is bigger and God's love is bigger than we imagine. I think we often limit what God's doing in the world, and actually when you take a step back and look back at creation, you can see that God's work affects every part of life, our whole selves, all kinds of people, the whole world. It's not just limited. So I think that big perspective just kind of blows people's minds. Yeah. And then, The interesting thing was I started talking about Ethiopia. That was where I think I lost my train of thought. Ethiopia was one of these examples where every time I thought about Ethiopia, there's more and more you can find out about Ethiopia. So, for example, one of my colleagues on the MA I'm studying at the moment is leading an Ethiopian church in London.
Oh, okay.
And that church is really growing. So he's come to the UK as a missionary from Ethiopia. And then Patrick's been involved in partnerships with Ethiopian churches sending missionaries to Bangladesh and China. So I wanted to say that, but I didn't quite get there. But the church in Ethiopia has existed since, the Book of Acts, and now is huge and spreading around the world. But yes, there's still poverty there and still a lot of issues there. There's a war there at the moment. So I was thinking for us, what I really find strange being back in the UK, having lived overseas, is we only hear certain stories from other countries, and the things that we hear are important things to hear, like poverty or persecution or unreached people. Those things are all true, but there's also growing church, mission movements, theologians, mission thinkers. It's not one story. And so, I just want us to open our minds to that big picture.
And I guess when you sort of think about it's more than just one story, oftentimes if we tell a story that is different from the perceived reality, so let's take the Ethiopia situation. Okay, we support families in Gondor. Fantastic. We've got the link between the hospitals. Okay, so in that context, Ethiopia is a receiving context, but we also know it is a giving context. It's a context from which we can learn.
But we don't see that. The problem is we don't see that.
But also, because you have one, it doesn't mean you can't also have the other. So these things are not binary. It's like if I, let's take our children. It's like if I say, my number one child is like this, and this. It doesn't mean I've got anything against child number 2 and number 3. It's just at that moment in time I'm speaking about child number 1. And oftentimes we think if we're saying one thing, we're therefore denying the other. But we're not.
It's like when we lived in China, people would say, well, I've heard this is true about China, and that doesn't sound like what you've told us. I'm like, well, it's a big country. Yeah. And there's a guy Brent Fulton's written a lot about China, and he said that we have these narratives like the persecuted church narrative or the what was the other narratives he talked about? I can't remember them all now. But he said that with these stories that we tell, like the missionary sending church narrative about China, the different narratives we tell often say more about us than they do about the place that we're talking about. And if you've lived somewhere a long time, you almost feel like you know less than when you went there for a week. Mm-hmm. It's like there's so much more to learn, and that all of those things can be true about a place.
So then I guess if we look at that through the lens of mission, so traditionally, I think this is what we're trying to challenge. Traditionally, if you talk about mission, people would think about it's about going, it's about evangelism, it's about starting churches. That's what people think, and that's right. Mm. But I think what we've tried to say with this series is that's right, but that's not everything. So if you hear something about, God, about the relationship between one another, about creation, it doesn't deny the importance of evangelism and church planting. That is important. But so is relationships between people, so is our relationship to the created order. So it's trying to hold all those in place. And I think we have I guess oftentimes, maybe I'm speaking about myself, a natural bias to essentially black, white, good, bad. We dualize things, and actually, God's world doesn't allow us to do that.
So I think what's exciting about this is we have mission partners in different parts of the world, Romania, Kenya, Bolivia, and it's very easy for us to think about those countries in just the receiving sense. So the challenge is we need to find out, and of course Ethiopia, we need to find out how they're sending, like you were doing with Ethiopia. We need to do that. But equally then in Leicester, we think about Leicester as being, we're going out, to the world. So no. We've got mission, well, not partners with us, but missionaries in the city from America, from Brazil, we need to find out about that as well.
Yeah,
Very exciting.
it's kind of it's exciting. I think it's still true that there are masses of people who haven't heard the good news of Jesus, but the church has grown, and I think we need to be listening to the global church. Like, there are about 700 million Christians in Africa now. That's huge. That's a great story, but we also need to be learning from them as well as going to.
I guess also one thing that we're trying to say, I guess, through this series as well is that, okay, we have missionaries, I use the word, who we sent to Kenya, to Bolivia, working with in Romania. And that's great, that's important. That's part of our ministry from Nine Free Church. If we were not sending people, I would say we are not living as a church. However, we also have a church of, 200 and whatever it is members. We've now got an official number. Pre-COVID, we had 400 or so people through here on a Sunday. Each one of them is a part of God's mission. So that, we send people out, and that's fine. But also, for us here, we're all a part of this God's mission, of God's, which is, I'm assuming this is where you were sort of putting us. God has a mission, and he calls us to be a part of that. Are you sent to Bolivia? That's great, do it there. Are you here in Leicester? That's great. No one is more important than another. And I think that's when you put God at the centre rather than activities at the centre, that's when that becomes clear, as unfair to say. In my mind, it becomes
It
clearer.
Changes the perspective on it, doesn't it? Yeah.
Okay, so I then preached on really us and others. And I struggled with this, trying to work out what it was. But I in the end, I got really excited about it. And it enabled me to go back to those glorious passages in Ephesians 2 and 3. But it's in a sense of God is building a family. And I really like that. I really like that. He's not building, I know you could say he's building a movement. But ultimately, it's down to family, it's down to relationships between us and him as the Father, and between us and each other, brother and sister. Okay. But I suppose what I wasn't able to explore as much as I wanted to is, I think he then uses that family together to reach out and bring others in. And you've got kind of the ultimate apologetic, which is love. By this will all men know that you're my disciples if you love one another. Great, all that wonderful stuff. We talked about what it means to be a family. We're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but when I wrong you, I need to go, I'm really sorry, Deb. You forgive me, and so on. We can move on. The question I've got is, how do people get close enough to see that? Because a lot of that happens, some of it happens in this room, a lot of it will happen in houses around Leicester. How does somebody at the end of this road see that wonderful love?
Good question. I think that's where inviting people to join, and I like that word invite that you used, because it's not going and telling somebody a message. It's inviting someone to join something. So I thought what was interesting about what you said was you're actually describing what it is that people are joining if they become a follower of Jesus. So that should be attractive. And then it also means it's important how we treat one another and how we resolve conflicts and issues.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. So I think it's inviting people in and knowing who we are. I guess it's being more clear about our identity as a group of people, and then being welcoming and not just saying, oh, this is nice for us, but not wanting to invite anybody to join.
Yeah.
And I guess in an individualistic culture that is, traditional, British culture, is actually saying, to be a follower of Jesus is not just an individual decision, but you're actually part of something bigger. Now, the individual side of things, perhaps in our culture and context, may be bigger than if it is in another place, but there is still that element of joining something. We have, I think, generalization. We often have this idea that it's a very private thing, isn't it? But actually, God doesn't allow faith to be a private thing. You are part of something bigger, and I guess that's that invitation. Yes, is it intimate and individual between you and God? Yes, but like we say before, that's not everything. There is that corporate community nature of it as well, and so, I think that's probably something where we can learn from other people. Think about churches in Asia that we used to go to. They would always eat together afterwards. It was just a natural thing. They were a natural part of their community.
That was something we used to do before COVID on a Tuesday night. That was really good fun to eat together. And I think in other cultures, I've noticed that people, it's more natural for them to, when they read a Bible story, to read it in a communal way.
Oh, really?
And to the interpretation of what they read is different. So it's. I think we often think it's really vastly different between cultures, but what it is we see and reflect our own culture into what we read. And there might be parts of the story that don't resonate with us at all, and we kind of skip over them. But in another culture, then somebody will be reading the same story and different elements will jump out at them. So that's why it's really good to read the Bible with people from different cultures, because you can hear their perspective on it and you go, oh, that's really interesting. So, for example, when somebody's from a country where they're used to being a minority, their reading of the Bible stories and the text is going to be different from us, where we're used to being, if not in a majority in terms of numbers, but culturally, being a Christian is not as unusual, believe it or not, here compared to a lot of countries in the world. I think people here sometimes think, oh, we're persecuted. Like, maybe some people are, but generally speaking, this is a very relaxed, open country. And hearing other people's perspectives just blows your mind. Yeah.
No, thank you. Well, I got excited about that. I'd love just looking into that, so thank you very much. And it's worth saying, you said it in your talk, but this came out of a book by Krish Kandaya, didn't it, this whole series?
Yes, so it was a book that Krish, when he spoke here last year, mentioned, The Greatest Secret, it's called.
Which is a great book.
It's very good. I mean, for him, it was all about adoption, obviously, and then using the theme of adoption running all the way through the Bible. But in his little section about mission, he kind of summarised what I'd been reading in a bigger book by Chris Wright, The Mission of God, into just a few pages, and I thought, that's helpful. I mean, some of you might like to read the whole big book, but that's really helpful.
I mean, it sort of came out of Chris's sort of, when he was a university student, going to a missions conference or whatever, and he didn't feel he fitted any of the categories for missionary, and he was like, but surely God has a mission for me. And so it was very much his outworking of where he fits into God's mission. So I think that's what's quite nice. Here's somebody who's born and brought up in the UK and wanted to live in the UK and is living out the mission that God has given him here in the UK.
Okay, thank you. And then Patrick, last Sunday you spoke. We're smiling because he hasn't.
We're going to be going back to the future.
We're sitting here on the Wednesday before the Sunday, so he hasn't preached.
You've got a great poker face, I have to say, Patrick.
And knowing Patrick, anything can happen on Sunday. So.
But what you meant to speak about was.
Tell us a little bit about what you were talking about.
Yeah, so
the world, isn't it?
Yeah, so I'm looking at it very much focusing on our relationship with the created order, with what we may call creation care. So it's very much saying, look, if God is the creator, Genesis 1, God created. John 1, in the beginning was the Word, was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made. So God is the creator, okay? And then we have the whole created order, and then we have Adam and Eve. So that's the whole of creation. So how does God relate with the whole created order? He tells humans to go rule, subdue, take care of. There's another one, but there's the ruling, the subduing, but there's also the taking care of, and sort of that's the model of a relationship that was working well. And so actually saying for us now, okay, that's the model then. And we also look at the future coming, the reconciliation of all things, as Paul was writing in Colossians, through Jesus. How therefore, given that's the situation, how therefore should we relate with the created order? Well, if God has spent all that time creating, we have a duty to look after it. We have a duty to honour God through how we look after the created order. So if looking after, caring for creation is not a part of our mission, we are just missing a whole part of who God is. God has created this amazing world, this amazing universe, you know, goes on for who knows how much. So let's think, if that is what God has done, how will we respond? And so this is where, you know, as followers of Jesus, we should just be responding to the created order in a way that acknowledges that it is God's and acknowledges the care that he has for it. So I brought in on Sunday one of Pete's little toys, who was called Wee Man. And I sort of was trying to bring out, whether I did or not, who knows, but I was trying to bring out the relationship between our Pete when he was little and this little toy. And Pete would do everything to try and protect Wee Man. We would do everything. If Wee Man was broken, we would look to repair him. If Wee Man was lost, we would look to go and find him. Because Pete was in a relationship, for want of a better word, with his toy. You know, it was special to him. And that's how we should be working with the created order. It is part of what it is to be followers of Jesus. And I think, you know, in an ideal world, I would have been able to unpack it a whole lot more. The Lausanne movement, which is established by John Stott, Billy Graham, from the first Lausanne movement meeting in 1974. They had a meeting in Cape Town in 2010. They've created a whole document, the Cape Town Commitment, and part of that looks at our role in terms of caring for creation. And one of the key things they says is that our care of creation has to come as part of our Lordship of Christ. If we say Jesus is Lord, then that has to be included. Creation care has to be included in that. And so very much putting it in that perspective of seeing creation from God's view rather than from our view. So if I see what God has done, well, I want to look after it. In the same way that I can see the relationship that Pete has with Wee Man. It's not a perfect analogy, but I want to look after Wee Man because of that. So much so that when I said to our Pete, can I use Wee Man? And he said, yeah, you can. Do you know where it is? Yeah, I do. You know, he stopped playing with it, 15 years? No, maybe more. But,
I think more than that.
Yeah, probably more than that. But I still know where Wee Man is because of that relationship that Pete had with that toy. That is how we should be caring for creation. So that is an integral part of our witness. So do we do evangelism? Yes. Do we do church planting? Yes. Do we look after the poor? Yes. Do we look after creation? Yes. And then also within that, seeing our care of creation actually as a justice issue. One of the things I hopefully said was...
Don't do so. It was a great sermon. It was one of the best I've
Yeah, amazing.
Was actually the interrelatedness of all of us. And Martin Luther King said, you look, whatever happens to one happens to us all. So we do not see the rising sea level, say, in the Pacific. We don't see the melting... what are they called? Those snow things.
The ice caps.
Ice caps.
No.
Glaciers.
Glaciers. We don't see the melting glaciers in the Himalayas. But our actions impact that, and even though we don't see that, it is still impacting. I know people in Nepal who it is impacting. Know of people in the Pacific who it is impacting. So we have a duty, in terms of justice, to do something because this is negatively impacting them. And so seeing the world, I guess, as God sees it, and our sort of responsibility, all under the Lordship of Christ. We're not doing it because it is the right thing to do. We're not doing it because it's the politically correct thing to do. We're doing it because this is what God would want us to do.
Yeah.
And that's where I think we need to view creation care through that lens.
And I guess as well, if you know people, and if we're going to be in heaven with people from these places that are more impacted by things than we are here, and there might be times in the future when we're more impacted than other people, they turn around and say, well, what did you do about that? Or why didn't you help us with this? Yeah. And I think it's when it's distant. I mean, even this week with the foreign aid, people have said, well, our country's got needs, we should look after our own first. I think it's easier to think about ourselves first when we don't know people from some of those other places. But if you've got to look them in the eye and know that you're part of the same family, then the whole me first, I'm so glad I've had my 2 shots, you know, I'm so glad I've had it, doesn't seem quite so okay when you actually remember that we're part of the same family.
And I mean, it's interesting, a Conservative MP who supports the re-establishment of our aid budget going from 0.5 to 0.7% of national income. And there may be issues with how we use that aid. That's perhaps another story.
Yeah.
But it's a sign of generosity. And he said, aid is a climate issue because as we decrease the aid, as we decrease the support we're giving to countries, this has a negative impact on the climate. So, you know, it's that sense of, you know, so as a result, I wrote to my MP just to encourage him to think about where he would be voting if a vote came. At the moment, it looks like one might not be coming. But, you know, thinking about those sorts of things that, okay, we're only one people, one group, a church or something like that. But actually, if we say, what does God want me to do in this particular situation around the climate? Actually, it impacts our relationship with God. So one thing I didn't do on Sunday, hopefully, is I've not given a whole load of things. Oh, you should do this. You know, you should share your bath with somebody. You know, don't wash up that coffee cup. You know, share it round everybody. You know, or there's a whole load of things. Have a shower, not all those sort of. I didn't actually do that. What I actually did was, hopefully, what I actually did was to say, this is the situation. Why don't you go and ask God, what do you want me to do? How do you want me to respond? Because that's going to look different for all of us. We've all got different contexts. But actually, what that is saying is, Lord, I want you to be important in my life today, at this moment. As I'm walking down the street, as I'm thinking, I need to go out, how am I going to go? Am I going to bike? Am I going to take the car? Sometimes you're going to need to take the car. No one's criticising that. But actually, each decision then gets put in the context of a relationship with God. And actually, I think that's quite exciting.
I love, actually, you've taken creation and you put it all in the context of relationship. So relationship with God, but also relationship with others. Because if I take a car, a flight, whatever it is, that has implications for other people around the world. Yeah, love it.
And also, it becomes then, hopefully, non-judgment. I'm not judging somebody for the decisions that they make. I don't judge somebody for, how they relate with their neighbours or whatever. I'm just saying, or we can say, and maybe a question we can ask as a church is, how can our church be more environmentally friendly? And actually, you talk about how does that impact the area. Well, let's see if we can do things with this church environmentally and let the neighbours know. This is what we are doing for the environment of this area. And this is something also, I think, this is something that young people are engaged in. So let's listen to them, let's learn from them. I know last year when we did it, you had Annie speaking, and that's great, Annie Goddard. Let's listen to the young people and see where they are with this and make changes accordingly.
Guys, thank you. Anything else you want to add?
Don't think so.
Happy with that? Terrific. Thank you for joining us for Under the Bonnet. Thank you for joining us for Under the Bonnet. We said we weren't going to do another one of these until September, but this just seemed a really good way to finish off this series. And I think what we might do, this is for you, you're going to hear this first, is we're going to be looking at a series called Meals with Jesus, meals that Jesus had with people in Luke's Gospel. And I think at the end of that, we might get a few of the preachers together and have a little...
Over a meal, perhaps?
Over a meal.
Oh. They're so good, aren't they? Brilliant. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. And
Thank
we'll
you.
see you again soon.